What's up guys, Iron Books here for the second part of my The Lions of Al-Rassan review. So, I am 40% way through Lion of Al-Rassan. General thoughts so far. The story is getting slightly better and better and better. Okay. Not this crazy, amazing prose, blah, blah, blah. No, it's still not amazing prose. I'm sorry to the ramble, but it's still not amazing prose. But it is getting slightly better. I am becoming more and more invested with each of the characters, especially the Jedi characters. I don't know why, but they're the most interesting part and the most entertaining part of the story. They seem very chaotic to me. The same thing as the Asherites, but for the Jedites, it's a bit different, right? Because obviously they're different cultures. Europeans versus Easterns, right? Middle Easterns and / Africans. Anyways, let's try to get through this quick because it's starting to get cold as fuck here in North Carolina. Alright, so first note. So first things first is that we are in the Jedite region now. Specifically in one of the kingdoms. I forgot which kingdom exactly, but it is where Ricardo Rodrigo, that's his name, right? I'm pretty sure. Yes, Ricardo Rodrigo. The captain of Alvar's band, his house's homestead, his house's land, so to speak. The reason why we are in this perspective now, specifically of their children, is because the cousin of the guy who was killed that raped the pregnant woman is now come back up to Rodrigo's homestead so that he could enact legal vengeance, so to speak. Because his cousin was killed by the order of Captain Rodrigo, he now has the right, basically, to go to Rodrigo's home, get a bunch of horses, and rape his wife. That's literally the whole premise. Thankfully, though, it doesn't come to that. Why doesn't it come to that? Because of one of Rodrigo's sons. This is where the fantastical element starts to come into play. One of Rodrigo's sons, Diego, has a future vision. Literally, he's able to see visions of sort of futures around the area where he's at. And Diego, one of the younger of the twin children that Rodrigo has, sees a vision of the cousin. What's his name? Where is it? The cousin of Derrida is coming up to them. He tells his mother complains for a second, and then they all get ready for his arrival. Eventually, we get some more perspective with Rodrigo's wife, Miranda, who talks a little bit about specifically not liking that her husband left her with only farm hands and boys to protect themselves in case anything happens. Specifically, this one line, this is Miranda's point of view. "The boys can handle trouble," he had written, blithely. She imagined seeing her husband riding home just then, emerging from the trees into the wide, grassy space before their walls. She imagined shooting him as he rode up. Very funny. And then we get another little tidbit about Rodrigo's children, is that they are freaking young, man. They're both 13 years old, and they're about to kill the cousin of Derrida, and a bunch of his band members. Crazy to think that these young of people are doing this type of shit, right? I have a younger sister that's 12. I can't imagine her killing some random grown adult with a bow and arrow. And so seeing that perspective is a tad bit weird and unique, at least to me, because that's not something that I think about. You know what I mean? Like, for us in modern day, the military only lets you in when you're 16, right? So a couple years older. Hold on, let me make sure I'm recording. A couple years older, right? So I'm not used to people being this young doing this type of harm to other people. Of course, they deserve it, though. Then we get Garcia's perspective, the cousin of Derrida, where he, in his mindset, is talking about wanting to rape Miranda, Rodrigo's wife. He actually finds it to be kind of a awesome situation that his cousin was killed, the other one that raped the pregnant woman, so that he would have the chance to rape Miranda. So, yeah. Fucked up people. Which is why I almost DNF'd this book, but hey, getting a little better. And then we see a little bit of foreshadowing here. At least I think it's foreshadowing. I'll say out this passage here. 2 days after his main troop had parted from the 4 messengers, he remembered that he'd forgotten to tell them to have weapons and horses sent back down for the garrison at Lobar. He briefly considered sending another pair of men north, but remembered the commander's insolence and elected not to bother. There would be time enough to pass on that word when he arrived in Estern himself. It would do the pampered soldiers good to be short of weapons and mounts for a time. Perhaps someone else's boot might split at the heel. To make the story short, Garcia dies going up to Belmont's farm. But he has this information that a specific garrison, a specific outpost near Cardigan is not well manned anymore because he had taken their horses and weapons to go to Belmont's home. Is there going to be any sort of news about that? Is there going to be any sort of repercussions because of that? He had information about this one specific thing that the people he took the stuff from said, hey, we're an important outpost. We should have arms and weapons and men. But they don't now. And it hasn't been mentioned yet that there's any sort of repercussions from this, but I wonder if this is some subtle foreshadowing to later on in the book, maybe Cardigan able to get out of their way and blast through this outpost to go to the Jedi Kingdoms. Who knows? And then we get some nice, delicious justice where Garcia, thinking that since he is of high noble birth, can basically address the young boy, which is Belmont's son, that, hey, you can't treat me like this, blah, 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 because he got caught by the boys, and is at a bow and arrow point right now. But here's a response. The boy so addressed blinked, as if in surprise. Then he nodded his head briefly. 3 archers shot Garcia's horse from under him. Kicking his feet out of the stirrups, Derrida leaped free just in time to avoid being crushed by the falling horse. He stumbled to one knee in the wet grass. It kind of reminds me of the Jon Snow moment where he's fighting the wildling after the whole battle in the Black Keep ended. And he's like, dude, why are you still fighting? Come on. And then he tries to fight him, and then he freaking shoots him in the freaking foot. A very similar moment that I really liked. And then we get a badass moment where Garcia is, hey, I'm surrendering, blah, blah. I have to have this sort of deal. This is repercussions for what Belmont did to me. And Miranda said, I don't give a shit, and shot him in the face anyways. Awesome stuff. And then we get a sort of, a bit of a time jump. Now Belmont is back up to the Jedi Kingdoms, where the king, Ramiro, one of the Jedi Kings in the north, is sort of setting up a council, setting up an intervention between Gonzalez and Rada, the cousin of Garcia who died, and Rodrigo Belmont, to get the situation that they have settled. King Ramiro is probably my favorite character as of right now. The way his badassness was put through the screen was very, very cool. It kind of reminds me of Ned Stark or Robert Baratheon. That sort of badass energy that, like, hey, you need to listen to me or shit's about to pop off type of thing. As he's telling Rodrigo Belmont and Gonzalez, right? And I would say this is the closest thing, that's the closest thing to this book. This book, The Lions of Al-Rassan, feels very Game of Thronesy. Very Games of Thronesy. And I don't know if that's on purpose or not. I don't know if he wrote this after Game of Thrones, but it feels very much like that. There's tons of perspectives, big worlds, right? A whole country of different kingdoms to think of. It's very widescape, which I don't usually like, and I still don't really like in this book, but it does give a sort of scale in this. And all of this political conversations is interesting when I understand it. So King Ramiro in this scene was just very badass to me. And then we finally finish up the King Ramiro scene talking to Belmont and Gonzalez, where he sets up a deal between them. One, Belmont, because he killed Gonzalez's cousin, is exiled for a couple years. And Gonzalez, because of his cousin wanting to do bad shit to Belmont's family, is now assigned to Belmont's family to protect them from at all costs. Very interesting stuff. And then we get some really interesting scenes between King Ramiro and his wife. Let me remember her name real quick. Queen Ainz. Queen Ainz is a very religious character in this story. Very religious. To the point where she doesn't really like her husband. Why is that reason? Because King Ramiro is not as religiously strict as she is. And that goes through this whole scene where she is talking to King Ramiro, and King Ramiro eventually sets a situation where they were sleeping together. And here's some interesting things to think of. One thing that Queen Ainz says is that she doesn't like that King Ramiro bathes consistently. To her, bathing is only something that is done for ceremony. It's not done for the pleasure of just doing willy-nilly. While King Ramiro, who was at Al-Rassan when he was younger, as a sort of prisoner, knew to bathe regularly. He likes it, so he doesn't. So I find that interesting that Queen Ainz sees that as sort of a falling in terms of religious stature. And it is constantly mentioned throughout this entire section between her and King Ramiro that she is very much ashamed / disgusted by her own sexual urges. She says that she likes doing it with King Ramiro, and she likes that King Ramiro is a handsome man. But in her religious viewpoint, is seen as a sort of sin. She doesn't want to fall prey to her sexual urges. Interesting stuff when it comes to religion really shunning you in terms of the act of sex. A lot of the time, religion shuns you strictly when it comes to thinking sexual thoughts. And then we get a bit of a funny scene where each paragraph starts with her basically saying that, oh, I'll repent for this later, because eventually they both do have sex. And each paragraph of them escalating to that situation is her saying, oh, well, I'll just repent about this later. Oh, there will be some wise counseling thoughts from her advisors after this act is done. It's very weird, because you would think since she is a queen of a king, that she would take full advantage of doing it every single time so that they would have children. It's a very interesting thing where religion is kind of holding her back in a sense. And here's a little passage that I will read out that kind of hammers whole religion being very shameful, being very shaming in terms of sexual acts. She intended to, an oversight. She was wrongfully proud of her hair, and as a penance kept it tied tightly back almost all of the time. Self-consciously, she pushed a strand from her eyes. He would laugh at her if she began buying it up now, she knew. Even to the point, her shame is so great that she's even ashamed that she has long hair. It's so crazy how this religion is kind of holding her back from just enjoying life. Very interesting. And then we get an interesting line from the books that I'll kind of explain a little bit further. Here it is. In fact, Ainz suddenly realized, looking at the man on her couch, if he hadn't been so much an infidel in the most important matters, she might have been able to name her husband a paragon among men. Because of this religious shame that she feels constantly in her relationship, in her life all the time, she doesn't even see her own husband as a good person among men. Because of the shame that she has due to their religion. Interesting battle in terms of thought processes. And then we get a bit more geography talked about. I'd have to look every single, kind of have to go back to the map to see where the hell everything is, because I am constantly confused about where things are. I know for sure that the Jedites are north, the Asherites are south, and the Kindath are sprinkled throughout. That's more so what I know for sure. And like I said, this high fantasy, this high sci-fi type of books confuse me when it comes to these sort of things, because there's so many places to think about, so many places, kings, lords, knights to remember, and it's just kind of hard for me to do that. Probably because I have so much crap going on in my life. I have school and work at the same time as I'm trying to read these books and do stuff with the channel. And so because of that, I'm not able to remember stuff as well. But it's a little bit of a tidbit, a skill issue, you could say. And then we get a situation where Belmont, after being told by King Ramiro that he is being banished, goes to his home, where his sons basically play a prank and hold him hostage. And in my head, that's a bit of a dangerous thing. What if Rodrigo thought it wasn't actually them and just killed them? Like, just happened to get the upper hand at that moment and fucking slice somebody's head off. What would happen then? A bit of a dangerous thing, if you ask me. And after this section of the book, where we see King Ramiro and his wife, and Rodrigo and his wife, where I finally get some good relationships. Finally, there is some romantic relationships that I actually like. I like King Ramiro and Queen Ines. I like Rodrigo and his wife, Miranda. I like it. And it's very nice to actually have people somewhat to root for. Rodrigo might do some horrible shit later on. I don't think King Ramiro would, though. So it's very nice to have people that I can actually root for and not feel bad about it, so to speak. And then we get a section where we're back with Kartada, where the king, Al-Malik, remember, who killed all of his merchant noblemen so he could keep power, is kind of set up throughout this little section to be very spoiled. To the point where he has to have a slave to clean his fingers and mouth after he eats an orange. Very spoiled king. And we get a section where he's talking to a general of his army about trying to find Ammar ibn Khayran, because Ammar ibn Khayran has left, so to speak. Get a section basically showing that he's the big bad of big bads. And then we get a huge twist where one of the slaves poisons Al-Malik. The person who I thought was going to be the big bad guy the entire book is killed. He's killed by a slave who turns out to be Ammar ibn Khayran. And not only him who actually poisoned him, Al-Malik's own son was also playing along with it. He was one of the disguised servants, who was also in cahoots with Ammar ibn Khayran to poison King Al-Malik. And not only that, are we getting a crazy subversion of the plot, in my opinion, because like I said, I thought Al-Malik was going to be the big bad of the big bads. His son, Al-Malik II, bans Ibn Khayran from Kartada because of this poisoning situation where he was in cahoots with himself. Crazy stuff that I was really not expecting at all. Very cool in terms of politicking, and very much reminds me of Game of Thrones. It gives me so much Game of Thrones vibes, how all of these twists and turns are pulling up. And so now in my head, I'm like, well, what the fuck we gonna do now? What's the point of the story? Where are we going to? Because the big bad is dead. Anyways, after this section, we get basically Guy Gabriel Kay's attempt to make Ammar ibn Khayran more sympathetic. I don't give a shit. He is a child killer, so I will not see him as a sympathetic character, no matter how many times you try to do that, Guy Gabriel Kay. Anyways, next section. We get another part, a little bit after the killing of Al-Malik, where Al-Malik's wife Zabira, goes to Ammar ibn Khayran to basically escape with him from Kartada, because Zabira is not Al-Malik II's mother. He is his stepmother. She is his stepmother, and so wants to escape with Ammar ibn Khayran. They have sex for some reason, and they were talking about Al-Malik and Zabira actually loving him, and Zabira saying that Ammar ibn Khayran loved him, and blah blah. I honestly don't really care. I do find it interesting though that Zabira has to leave now because of Al-Malik II being king of Kartada now. And then we finally get up to Alvar and Jahane, who, along with Velaz, have gone to Ragosa. Alvar convinced Rodrigo Belmont to let him go with Jahane to Ragosa because Jahane needs a guard. Rodrigo agrees, and they go to Ragosa. Of which, at the first time they settle down in Ragosa, Jahane and Alvar have sex. I don't know what's up with Jahane. I don't really like her character. She seems a very easy character. She is very sexually minded. Many times throughout this story so far, she has talked about wanting to have sex. She has talked about the past of her having sex. And now she corrupted my good old boy Alvar, who is deeply in love with her, as is explained throughout the story. And so now I'm wondering, is there going to be any sort of romance? I don't know. Sorry, guys. Is there going to be any sort of romance between them? I don't know, and I don't really think so. Which kind of sucks because Alvar is one of my favorite characters currently. And he might not get what he wants, which is whatever. It's not too much to think about, but it's just, I'm really confused as to what Guy Gavriel Kay is going to do with Jahane's character. I don't really know what the point of all this is, especially since Al-Malik the First is dead now. A lot of the purpose of all of these characters has basically gone away. They have no plot, so to speak. And so I'm wondering, what the heck is he going to do with the remainder of the story? Because the main plot that I thought was going to happen is now non-existent. And so now we're kind of with Ammar ibn Khayran and Rodrigo's story in terms of their exile, right? I assume that's the main plot now. Ammar ibn gain his revenge, and Rodrigo Belmont going out of his way in exile to see what happens. We do get some hints that King Ramiro might be going after Cardoden, and might be wanting to conquer that region. I guess that's part of the plot now. That's what the next big event is going to be. But I'm just more so confused as to what are we going to do now with the remainder of our characters. And then we get a bit of Alvar kind of faking to be an adult. Well, more so kind of shaming the younger version of himself. Here's a line here. He usually tried to avoid running through the streets these days. It was too youthful, too undignified. But the news of the morning was enormous, and he wanted to be the one to tell Jahane. That's a weird comment for Alvar to think. Why is he thinking it too undignified to run through the streets? He is a young man. He is someone of younger stature. I'm just sort of confused as to why he is kind of shaming his past self. Who knows? Eventually we get a really cool, badass scene where we are in Ragosa, and now Rodrigo Belmont and Ammar ibn Khayran have came to Ragosa to basically seek employment with the king of Ragosa. Ammar ibn Khayran tries to talk his way out of a dangerous situation, where Rodrigo intersects and butts in the conversation, basically calling Ammar ibn Khayran's bluff, because Ammar ibn Khayran was planning on killing Sabira for her betrayal of leaving Cardoden for the king of Cardoden, Al-Malik II. Ammar ibn Khayran immediately drops his flirtatious persona and immediately looks to Rodrigo. And now we have kind of started the rivalry between them, which for this little section here is sort of interesting. And it's constantly mentioned throughout the next couple pages, this last section that I read, that they are probably the best skilled swordsmen of all time, at least in their country, and that they are very equal in terms of this too. We eventually get a time jump. Hold on. Oh, we get a sort of time jump where Ammar ibn Khayran and Rodrigo Belmont are basically told by the Chancellor of King Ragosa, have a little situation, have a little dueling tournament-like event to prove Ammar ibn Khayran's worth in terms of being an employment to King Ragosa. They skip that entire scene. I don't know why Guy Gavriel Kay skipped that scene. Was it because he didn't want the passage to be as long? Was it because he knows he's not as good as action, in terms of action writing? Because earlier on in this book, when it was talking about Alvar being in a couple duels due to him being in a new city and being challenged, he talks about him knowing how to defend a sword block to his knees, which is not how you defend a sword block to your knees in real sword dueling, Hema. you're not supposed to defend your knees with your own sword. You're supposed to just step away from it. So I think he might have skipped that entire section of Amari bin Chiron and Rodrigo Belmont fighting together so that he can avoid having to write a fight scene, because I don't think he's actually very good at writing a fight scene. We'll see though. And then we get some thoughts from Jahane, because she finds Amari bin Chiron after this little event outside, and she starts following him. And she sort of comments on the typical woman that would chase Amari bin Chiron, and here's the passage. What she'd done in following him was not remotely the same thing, she told herself. She wasn't young or bedazzled. She wore a plain white cloth cap to keep her hair from her eyes while she worked. No jewelry, mud-stained boots. She was level-headed, a physician, and observant. I don't think she's that much different from the girls that pine over Amari bin Chiron, because multiple times throughout the story, Jahane is mentioned pining or thinking about Amari bin Chiron. I don't think she's that much different from all of them. And so yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. We get a little bit of jokes here and there where Jahane, Rodrigo, Amari bin Chiron talk about a specific person who, if they forgot their father's name, would be typical because of the region that they're at. And that's pretty much it for now. So I'm interested as to what's going to happen, because Amari bin Chiron and Rodrigo Belmont are going to be set out on a winter campaign to a specific city by King Ragosa, so as to keep them away from the city. I wonder what's going to happen. Very interested to see. But yeah, that's the part 2 of my Lions of Al-Rassan review. It's getting better and better. I'm liking the characters more and more and more, especially the Jadeite characters. That's all I have, guys. This was Iron Books. See you guys later. Please subscribe, please comment, and have a good day.